I'd like to share a couple of unforgettable stories with you from my childhood. I grew up in the southern United States in the 1950s and 60s. And at that time, people were largely judged first by the color of their skin. And there were really only two colors. You were either black or you were white. Nothing in between. Scientifically, we know that it's more complicated than that, but that was the social construct at the time. And one of the problems was that even in our own community, we tended to judge each other that way sometimes. I'll give you an example. This is a brown paper bag, and there was a little something called a paper bag test. So sometimes if you went to a club or you went out to some other social event in the evening, if you were darker than a paper bag, you might not get in. When I was 5 years old in the 1950s, growing up, and do me a favor, don't try to do the math. I see you. I was in kindergarten at 5, and I used to play with little girls on the playground. We would do little 5-year-old girl things. And one day we got ourselves into trouble. We went through a hole in the playground fence. Now they caught us, brought us in, and of course they scolded us. But there was one teacher, and as the other girls scampered back to their desks in the classroom, she held me back. And she came over to me as though she wanted to make sure that I really understood what she had to say. And she said to me, "Now you know you can't do what those other girls do, because you'll really get in trouble." I knew exactly what she meant. She meant that I was too dark-skinned to have free reign of that playground and do a lot of the other things that my classmates did because they were light-skinned, and I wasn't. Now, she didn't say that, but at 5 years old, I had already imbibed the reality of the racism that was all around me. And so at 5 years old, that's what I knew about myself. A few years later, when I was 8, my family moved into a new house in a new neighborhood. And in those days, there was also a phenomenon known as white flight. And what that was when white families didn't want to live next door to black families, they would move away to the suburbs, to neighborhoods where black families didn't yet live. So we moved next to the last white family on the block. And I soon discovered that they too had really wanted to retreat. So I'm outside playing in my new front yard, doing little 8-year-old things all to myself. And I noticed on my white neighbor's porch, there was a little boy who appeared very suddenly, little wisp of a boy, big blue eyes, little blonde boy. He and I saw each other at about the same time, and I'm thinking, new playmate, possibly? I mean, there was an age difference, but sometimes, you know, that happens with children where it's okay. But it wasn't to be. Just as soon almost as we saw each other, he came running all the way over to the side of the banister on his porch and leaned over towards me. I was in my yard. And he said to me, "Nigger," throwing his finger like he was throwing me away. I was devastated because I wondered, how could he know that about me? And he said it as though he was not just judging my race or my family, but he was saying it to me personally. And it actually really hurt me. Now, many years later, I was able to understand that he didn't say that out of some deep deliberation. It was actually because he had overheard some adults using that term, maybe his parents. And so by dint of just that action, this one little boy and his parents had actually scarred another child for life, me. I never forgot it. I'd like you to fast forward into the 1980s, and now I'm an adult, and I live in multicultural Manhattan, New York City. And I'm so happy that at that time I was blessed to have all around me people of many different stripes. For example, there was a Slovenian who took in my dry cleaning, and the Afghan fruit seller that I bargained with at the corner. And then there was a little Asian lady who ran the market that I used to frequent. I never got a chance to really find out where she was from, but that's okay. We would smile at each other when I would come in. So one day, I went in and I took along with me my teenage son. He was about 14 at the time, but I don't think she saw that we were together. Soon after I got in the store, I realized that I had forgotten something, so I went back outside and I left my son in to browse. Not too long after that, he comes striding out of the store, dejected, but angry and upset. Body language that told me something had really bothered him. What I was able to get from him was that after I left the store, the clerk had followed him around, staring at him, watching him, and finally came over to him and said, "Is there something I can help you with?" He was convinced that she thought he was only there to steal. I was livid. I gathered up my son and I dragged my son back into that shop, but I was also dragging with me the memory of that 5-year-old girl on the playground and the 8-year-old girl at the end of that finger. I took all of them and I wrapped them up in my adult dignity, and I said to that shopkeeper, "You know what? You and me and my son are actually all the same people, and you will not stereotype him again because we won't be back." As an adult, it was the same old story, but I could actually handle it a little better at the time. I don't want you to think that everything that happened to me was bad. To the contrary, there were many people who helped me along the way, who mentored me and supported me and built up my self-esteem. And one of those people, one by one, was even responsible for getting me here to Abu Dhabi to stand in front of you today. So in 2017, I, like you, try to fancy myself as a citizen of the world. I live here in the UAE, and I have new and wonderful and very different experiences all the time. Professionally, I ended up working in a field of organizational development called inclusion and equity. Inclusion, it's not what you think. Inclusion says we are fully ourselves, and other people are fully themselves, and each of us feels that we have not given up, compromised, or let go of any part of ourselves in the pursuit of our common aims. Bernardo Ferdman said that in 2010. Equity. Equity says that you and me and all of those people that I talked about, each of us deserves to be judged by the same fair and impartial standard, regardless as to who we are, where we come from, what we look like, sound like, or smell like, and that right is to be protected and defended. And I said that in 2017. So it is a little easier for me now, but I think that's what bothers me. Because as I make my way through the back streets of Abu Dhabi sometimes, I go into a shop and I realize that my Americanness now privileges me in ways that I don't think it should. Sometimes I might say to a shopkeeper, "Excuse me, I just want to ask you a question about this," and I get, "Yes, madam." But what about the woman over here who was ahead of me? And then I have my Filipino friend and my Pakistani colleague who talk about how people say things to them like, "Well, I really like talking to you because you speak such good English." And sometimes in Starbucks I overhear business people or recruiters talking about how they want to hire really good Emiratis. So what's wrong with this picture? And who am I now? And how am I supposed to construct my identity in the face of ever-changing positionality? Happens all the time. What do we do? Well, one of the things that I think all of us have to do is we have to learn and we have to listen. I'll take you back to those terms that I mentioned. So not only do we talk about a world being more inclusive, but there are things that you might hear today, concepts like cross-cultural competence or intercultural fluency. I actually prefer another term, cultural humility, which to me means that I recognize that I can learn from you just like you learn from me. So, what this actually says is that each of us does have the power to affect some change by our actions. We can take a stand. We can sit down. Think about Rosa Parks and that bus. Think about these folks. Now, you might say, well, they're famous. But this is not about talent. It's because each of them has done something. And I don't think it's always about courage, because sometimes people are just scared to death. But one by one, they've each done something. Courageous, yes, for better or for worse. And what that says is that it's about a little something else. It's about catalytic change and the power that each of us has to, in fact, impact a change in the life of someone else. You could be up here. So, you're probably wondering, what exactly do I want you to do? Well, a lot of people who come to a place like this and talk want you to start something new and do it tomorrow. Change your ways in your life. Right now, get up, and tomorrow things will be different. I'm actually not asking you to do that, because I do kind of believe that you have to deal with people where they are. And as humans, sometimes we need a little bit more time. We have to ruminate on something. Can't do it all at once. But maybe you'll have a moment when you'll be ready. And when that moment comes to you, I want you to be able to recognize that that time has arrived. Sometimes people say, well, you know, I just had to. Think of it like that. Start a courageous conversation, for example. No dad, no Bubba, no cousin. That's not it. He's not, fill in the blank, a terrorist or a convicted criminal, or you decide. Defend someone. Defend a gang member, a cop, a Catholic priest, a Wall Street broker. Defend a Muslim or a Jew or an American. Or defend a sex trade worker who's been forced into prostitution. Or defend an immigrant or a soldier. Now, what do all these people have in common? Nothing. And that's the point. In almost any context in the world today, you can find a person who has taken some actions that have profoundly impacted the lives of other people. And that would include the possibility for you and me as one person. Just like that one little boy, or the one teacher, or the one shopkeeper, or the one person that has done something good that makes you know that it's possible. Now, if you're thinking right now, yes, it would be good and it would be a lot better if people would do that, if other people would just sort of step up and realize that they need to do something to change something. If you're thinking like that, I'm talking about you too. So, the last thing that I want from you this evening is, I want you to think about someone who has profoundly impacted your life for the better. I want you to think of that person, put their name in your mind and say it to yourself quietly. Just nod your head if you're thinking of someone so I know you're with me. You don't have to tell me who it is. Now I want you to think about, if that question was asked maybe in another setting, would someone be thinking of you? The power of one. Thank you.